To start off here, I'm just going to pull up a picture of a cellist, and you're going to see on your screen this picture now of the cellist. One second. And it's a story. We're going to go back in time a little bit to 1992, where give me 1 second here. All right, there we go. And we're going to go back in time to 1992 to Sarajevo, into the center square of Sarajevo. And a man walks into the center square and he puts down a plastic chair and a cello case. He's dressed in full concert dress, as if he was giving a concert. He's the principal cellist of the Sarajevo Orchestra, and he proceeds to sit in the chair and begin to play his cello. And as the beautiful sounds of the cello fill the square behind him, in the background, there's artillery shells falling on buildings, and people are running for cover because it's the start of the Bosnian Civil War. Now, this man doesn't just come one time into the square, but he comes back for 22 consecutive days into the middle of the war zone to play a piece of music. He wanted to commemorate the 22 men, women, and children that were killed in a breadline at the start of this war. Now, I share this idea with you just because in my mind, it represents for us the idea of stillness. That what we're looking for in stillness is not to escape our environment to find a sense of peace or stillness. That hopefully most of us will never be in a war zone like this in our lifetime. But even if we don't experience that kind of a war situation, it makes me ask the question, whatever's bombarding our thinking, whatever makes us feel anxious or stressed or pressured on any given day, can we be in the midst of it and have a deep settled calm that allows us to bring what we have to bring to whatever situation we're in? Can we bring our stillness to whatever situation in which we find ourselves? It says again that we don't have to escape from our environment to find the stillness. We're not looking for our external environment to change in order to find peace. That we start with it within ourselves. And the reason we can do this, and the reason we look there, is because stillness is already part of our nature, of the divine nature of each one of us. And as we recognize it's something we have already, we're just looking to discover that stillness so we can let it characterize every moment of our daily lives. So that whether we're going out for a run or taking care of a household or taking care of a huge list of studies that we have to accomplish, or helping a friend, or doing a social event, or any number of things that we might have plate on any given day, doing church work, helping in our communities, whatever it might be that we have going on, can we bring stillness to it? How do we find that stillness? And how do we maintain it when there's things that will try to bombard our thought and pull us down a road that gets us into stress and anxiety? And how do we manage to be in the midst of a tough situation and not let ourselves get disturbed? So those are the questions we're going to address today in, I don't know, the next 45 minutes or so. Now, there's a little image here that I'll just share with you. And it has to do with sort of a couple of analogies that we're going to talk about today. And this first image is you'll see on your screen, it's of a mama swan, and she has little baby swans following her. And in case anybody's on the phone, I'll just describe the images if you're listening on the phone. And it says on the screen, the trick, make it look easy while you're paddling underneath like crazy. Underneath, you're paddling like crazy. Now, I used to think this is what stillness looked like. So years and years ago, I was sitting in Boston near this beautiful pond where there were swans kind of traveling back and forth across the ponds in the public garden in Boston. And I had so many things on my to-do list. I mean, my day was just, and my days in general were so packed. I was a new mom. I was acting as the first reader of the Christian Science church where I lived. I had just started a Christian Science practice. I was also a graduate student at the same time and had a very full load as a graduate student, and also was doing some community service and was teaching ski lessons at the same time. I mean, I had so many different projects going at the same time. I was doing some consulting work also. And I was thinking about how I was trying to find that sense of stillness, but it felt, and I was watching the swans on this body of water in the Boston Public Garden, and I was sort of envious of the swans. I was thinking, that's what I want to look like. The swans just looked so graceful as they were gliding across the water, and that wasn't exactly how my life felt at that moment. But then later I was describing this to a friend, and she said to me, now, Laurie, what the swans are doing underneath the water, and you can see that through this picture we just shared, which is that they're paddling like crazy inside, underneath. And that's what it felt like. That's how my life felt like at that moment. I felt like I was that swan. Like here I was trying to keep everything on the outside perfectly ordered and looking graceful and kind of put together. But on the inside, I felt like I was paddling furiously to just keep all the balls in the air that I was trying to juggle at the same time. So it wasn't really a sense of stillness that came from a place within. It had come instead from this other place, this place outside of ourself. And so as I went about my day, I was thinking, that's not my vision of what I want things to look like. I don't want to have the inside part of me feeling all anxious and stirred up while at the outside, I'm trying to kind of hold it all together. Like that's not the right version of what stillness really represents. So I now have a new analogy that I find really useful, and it comes from spending many hours with my children in music lessons. And you'll see on your screen a beautiful image of a cello. And the first thing that a student does when you go into a music lesson for cello is you have to tune your instrument. And inevitably, the instrument has come out of tune. And so the teacher will put on a pure, perfect tone on a tuner that plays a note that's on the cello, and then the student with the same note on the cello. And inevitably, there's the dissonance. You can hear the vibration because it's out of sync, out of tune. And then you'll see the little fine-tuning knobs on the bottom of the cello there on the screen. And those fine-tuning knobs make these minute adjustments to the instrument that line it up perfectly with the pure, perfect tone. And that, to me, is what stillness is like. That it's being so aligned and tuned in to what God is doing, that we don't feel like God is some sort of entity separate from us that we're praying to, that's kind of far away, out there somewhere, that we're hoping will come and intervene in our lives and help us with whatever we have going on. Sometimes prayer can feel like that, like we're trying to reach this God that's going to come and sort of make everything better for us. But the reason that this represents stillness for me now is that sense of tuning in to God's voice says that stillness represents a voice. It's not an emptiness. It's not just a clearing out of our thoughts, although that might be the first step. But it's really about filling up with listening and being conscious of God's presence, of divine love's presence in our lives. And when we think about God in Christian Science, rather than this personified image again that we talk, that's far away, a personified image of someone that's kind of looking at us, hoping we're doing well, sort of judging our movements to see, did we, study the Christian Science Bible lesson, or did we pray hard enough, or are we good enough to earn the love of God so that we can have a good life? That is not the version of God that Christian Science believes in. The sense of God that we understand is more like when the sun shines on the city where you live. So some of you are in Elsa, I know there's people of you joining from elsewhere. If you think about when the sun shines, it doesn't discriminate on which parts of the city get the most rays of sun. It doesn't say, well, this part of the city, they've done really well today, so they're going to get a lot of sun. And over here, well, they have a lot of work to do, so I'm not going to shine as many rays over there. The love of God, the power of God is the force of love. It's a principle and a divine law that undergirds our existence. I doubt that there's many of you that woke up this morning And before you got out of bed, you thought, gosh, I really, really hope that gravity is still working today, because I don't want to float off into the ether. I want to be able to walk to my classes or my schoolwork or my school or my work or whatever. And divine law is like that. We don't maybe consciously think about it. And it doesn't work because we think about it. It operates because it exists, that there's this principle underlying our experience that works on behalf of each one of us to align us with that goodness. And our job, and the reason stillness is so helpful as a practice, is it's like those fine-tuning knobs. It tunes us in to what God is doing. It tunes us into that one divine voice, to be listening for that presence of God and letting that characterize all of our activity. Now, Mary Baker Eddy said to some students of hers once, Mary Baker Eddy is the founder of Christian Science, and she said to her students once, she said, keep your violin in tune. Now, she wasn't speaking of an actual violin or of who played the violin, but she was talking about how each one of us is like that violin, and that our job, more than anything on your to-do list, between now and Christmas, I know we're in the Christmas season right now. Some of you may be working on finals if you're in college, getting ready for finals or preparing to leave for the end of the semester. Some of you may be just trying to get ready for Christmas, getting everything prepared. Whatever it is that would try to get us feeling the hustle and bustle and the demands of our lives, if we could think about the main goal of our day to be letting the stillness characterize everything we do, it changes the way we experience things. Because a lot of what stillness does is when we get still, it gives us a new perception of something. It tunes us in to the way God sees. And that's a different version than the way that we might see something. So for example, a couple of years ago, I was giving this talk, and a man came up to me afterwards, and he said that he had gone to the mall a couple of weeks before Christmas, and he had to buy something for a family member or something. And he got there, and it was hard to find parking. Everybody was looking stressed. People were shoving and pushing. There were lines. It was chaotic. It just felt like such a negative experience. People were arguing. He couldn't get into the stores, that he left. He gave up and he said, I can't handle this. I'm going home. Well, a couple days later, on Wednesday evening, he goes to the Wednesday evening meeting at the Christian Science Church in his local community. And this is where people will stand up and share a particular experience of healing that they've had, or a way that they're applying spiritual principles in their lives. And one woman stood up and she told the story of how she went to the mall on Saturday and how she experienced the most peaceful, harmonious, happy time at the mall. She said people were helping each other. They were smiling at each other. She found a parking space right away. She got in. She was able to buy what she needed, and she was able to get out quickly. And people helped her and were gracious, and it just wasn't feeling rushed or pressured at all. So she was just expressing a sense of gratitude for this kind of law of harmony in the universe that she was feeling that day. Well, the man goes up to her afterwards. It turns out they were at the same mall at the same time of day on the same day. And what he realized was that it was about, of course, the perception as opposed to the actual experience. And that's what tuning into God is like. As we tune ourselves into God, it keeps us aligned with that law of harmony, and we look for it wherever we go. Now, if you're a musician, you may know this, but musicians don't just tune in the morning, and then if they have a couple of concerts to play, they just kind of play all the concerts and then don't tune till the next day. They have to retune their violin throughout the entire day. Because as you play the instrument, it inevitably gets slightly out of tune. So there's a regular and constant retuning throughout the time of playing the instrument. And this is normal and natural. And I love it as an analogy for ourselves, that we're not trying to get to a point where we just pray in the morning, or have a moment of quiet or prayer time, and then we're just good kind of for the rest of the day magically somehow, right? What we're looking for is to see that whatever our quiet time looks like, however we get still and find that stillness, that we continually retune into that stillness throughout the day to keep ourselves tuned in, keep ourselves in tune. Keeping ourselves in tune is about being aware of when we're starting to get pulled down that road into anxiety and stopping in our thought and refocusing on the stillness. Now, how exactly do we do that? Well, here's an idea that someone shared with me a couple of years ago, and it's from a woman named Pam Brown. And she wrote, "At the center of the most turbulent heart, there is a place of peace, a place beyond time that cannot be touched by change or loss. No tumult can disturb the quietness. No shadow can dim the light. Here, in this stillness, is rest and healing. Nothing we suffer, nothing we fear can damage its perfection." Now, I hope you hear in this the sense that we talked about, that the stillness is already within you. It's already part of each one of us. And that whatever is happening on the outside doesn't ever touch that stillness. And that whatever circumstances may have been in our past or we may be experiencing in the present moment, it doesn't damage or disrupt that deep settled calm that's within each one of us. Now, Mary Baker Eddy, at one point in her life, I mentioned she was the founder of Christian Science, and she was a woman who really understood this idea of stillness. She was living in Boston during a time when she was writing her book, Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures, and she moved back to her hometown, her home area of New Hampshire, to really reconnect with that great sense of stillness so that she could accomplish the work that she wanted to do. She said that the closet was her home and that God has now given her all of earth that she desires. That sense of the closet was really about what Jesus said when he talked about how to pray in the Bible, about going into your closet, shutting the door, and praying. And the shutting the door, to me, is what stillness is all about. That it's about shutting out the thoughts that will race in our heads and try to keep us from experiencing that quiet. I know for me that I can be in the midst of the busiest day with a crowd of people around me with many demands and feel a sense of quiet and stillness and calm inside myself, even if everything outside of me is very loud. Someone shared yesterday, actually, at a talk I was giving about a rock concert they went to, and the only seat that they could get was right in front of this enormous, huge speaker, the size of like a whole wall. And it was so loud that his friend who had come with him had to leave the concert. He couldn't focus. But this individual decided to really connect with that peace and stillness that was inside of him. And it enabled him to not have any after effects from sitting in front of the speaker and to listen to the concert without being disturbed by the loud noise. That he was more conscious of what was going on inside of him than he was of what was externally happening. And that's what stillness allows us to do, to be more conscious of what's going on in consciousness than what's happening outside of us. And it brings us a sense of peace. Christian Science is based on the Bible and Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures, as I mentioned earlier. And we're going to talk about two keynote ideas today. The first one is from the Bible in Psalms. It says, "Be still and know that I am God." Now, how many directives do you see in this statement? There's two things, right? We're being asked to do: to be still, and then to know God, to know that I am God. This is a psalm. If you read Psalms 46, it's a psalm where the earth is very turbulent. Everything is stirred up. There's earthquakes. The waters are troubled. The mountains are falling up into the sea. And at the end of the psalm is this little phrase: know that I am God. I've got this. I'm on it. There is a power beyond ourselves that as we get still, we can know and trust that divine power for our lives. Now, the Bible in Christian Science really gives kind of the religious vision for Christianity. And the Science and Health book, to me, really a sense of how do we live that out? How do we take that vision that the Bible gives and live it out today? So Mary Baker Eddy says this. She says, "Spirit God is heard when the senses are silent." That it's about quieting our senses to find and connect with the stillness that's already there. Now, there's going to be three parts that we're going to talk about next. The first one is to look at when we practice stillness for ourselves, how can we really find that peace and stillness within ourselves? That's going to be kind of the bulk of the talk next. We'll talk about that next. And then we'll look briefly at how we can think about stillness in relationships to others, in sort of interpersonal relationships. And then finally, in the last piece, we'll look at for world events or things going on in our community that might be trying to disturb us. How can we maintain stillness in light of what's happening in the world? So for part one here, being still and thinking about the healing power of stillness for ourselves, that I think about this almost as if hopefully you see on your screen a spinning top. That what we're looking for to be at peace with ourselves is to have this sense that no matter how fast we might be moving at any given time of day, that even if we feel like we're having to move really quickly, if you've ever spun a top, then even as the top is spinning very, very fast, it can look from a distance like it's actually very still. And that's what we're looking for with stillness. That no matter how many things we have on our plate, that at any given day, no matter what might be pulling us to feel anxious or worried or concerned, that we can be like this spinning top, that it can look still, even as we might be moving really quickly. I am a runner, and the other day I was giving a talk in another part of the United States, and I was going out for a run that morning before the talk, and the thought occurred to me, how can I go out running with stillness? What would that look like? And just asking that question changed the perspective I had that morning on the run that I went on. And as I was running a few miles, I just could feel this sense of sort of harmony and timelessness about the run, that it wasn't about counting the minutes until I was done or the miles or et cetera, but just that sense of kind of harmony with everything around me. And more than I usually do. I usually feel that, but even more so. And I think that question is key. How can I accomplish whatever I have to do with stillness? What would it look like? So we're going to talk a little bit about that specifically. And what I'd like you to do, I'm going to open up the chat box now. So you will be able to chat into the chat box here, and hopefully you can find it on your screen while I'm talking. So you'll find your chat box. And the question that I'd like you to think about is, what does it look like for you to be at peace? So go ahead, if you're on your computer, if you're following the technology here, if you can go ahead and just chat in the chat box a couple of ideas. What does it look like for you to feel truly at peace? I know one thing for me, as you're all getting your technology, the chat box open, one thing for me to recognize that I'm truly feeling at peace is when my thought is centered in the present moment. And when I'm not ruminating about the past or worried about what might have happened in the past, and I'm not kind of anxious about the future or wondering what's going to happen in a couple of hours or with this activity I have going on or a test I have to do or a project I have to finish. I'm not thinking ahead about that. I'm really centered in the present moment. That's a key for me about really being at peace. Another key element that for me characterizes really being at peace is this sense of just kind of smiling for no reason and feeling like when I'm out in the world or whatever, that it's not because something happened in my life. I'm not feeling joy because I just got a big check in the mail or finished a project or was able to pay off a bill or whatever. I really am feeling at peace. And it's not that there's anything that got solved in my life. It's really just coming from that sense of joy that's not tethered to circumstance. It's coming from within us. Someone found the chat box, which is great. And they're saying that they feel at peace when they're feeling loved. That being at peace is about really experiencing that sense of feeling loved, feeling a sense of being surrounded by that sense of love. And sometimes in life, we can use a reminder about that. We can use a reminder to remember that we are surrounded by that sense of love, to reconnect with that. Another comment that someone made was when they feel no personal sense. Now, this is a term in Christian Science that we use of personal sense. And what it means to me is this sense of focusing on ourselves and taking things personally, making everything about what's going on for us, how we think about it, what happened to us, sort of bringing all the thoughts back to ourselves and what happened for us and how we responded, as opposed to thinking about that divine principle of the universe that keeps everything expecting good and keeps the good developing and unfolding. Somebody else mentioned that when they feel at peace, there's an ability to be intelligently spontaneous. Oh, I like this. That we can be intelligently spontaneous. And what that means to me, I love that idea because it's a sense of freedom, really, for me, that when we're feeling at peace, we're not feeling like we need to judge others or condemn ourselves. We're not focused so much on whether people approve of us or not, or whether somebody likes us or whatever. We're really just allowing ourselves to live in that moment space and just be spontaneous and I think the intelligence piece is great because it allows us to make that decision based on what sort of is in harmony with the rest of our lives. So there's a few other ideas here that being at peace is all about having a sense of satisfaction with the present moment, that there's a sense of harmony and oneness, like that tuning in we talked about, that there's a sense of trust in letting things happen rather than having to make them happen. And that's a key one, I think, for me, is that when we're feeling at peace, we no longer feel like we have to control everything or be in charge of everything. We're willing to let things unfold. And I'm just going to share, briefly, think for a minute to yourselves. You're welcome to chat it as well, but we're just going to look at the list here of where we look for peace in our lives. And it can be with relationships or finances or career options or maybe our studies or friendships, family, world events, busy schedules, etc., health, etc. And if you look at these two lists for a minute on your screen, just what I want you to notice is the distinction between the qualities and the vision of peace on the left, and then the places in life, the human experience where we're looking in our lives to see those qualities expressed. And in the story I'm going to tell you next, I started off, I was looking for healing of an issue, and I'll describe it in a second, but it's important in the experience to start first on the left-hand side with all of these qualities of what it means to look for stillness, to find that sense of peace, to connect with that. So I'll just share this story with you. And it was a time in my life years ago where I was feeling a great sense of stress and being a bit overwhelmed with too many things on my plate. And it was right before Christmas. And I had been experiencing for a number of years a chronic neck pain. I would wake up in the morning and would have kind of a crick in my neck and was experiencing a difficulty with being able to sort of turn my head and et cetera. I was having a stiff neck often. And it would kind of come and go. And like I do with most all challenges in my life from being a young child, I grew up in a family where my mother taught us to start off with prayer for healing of any kind. And so I was used to doing that. And I had started in this way with this particular challenge and had been addressing it. But one day near Christmas, I woke up and I had a sort of a stiff neck, and my prayer started off a little bit focused like this. It was almost sort of a demanding prayer. I was sort of saying, God, I really need a healing quick because I have so many things to do that I need this pain to go away so that I can accomplish everything that's on my list today. It was almost as if I was sort of the CEO of my life. And God was like this divine assistant that kind of comes in and like intervenes and sort of helps me out in some particular way. But I'm not recommending that you pray this way. And it didn't have any effect. So by the second day, I woke up and the stiff neck was much worse. And I still had more things to accomplish than hours in the day. So I started to go about my day, having done the prayer in the morning. But again, I didn't find the relief I was looking for. And by the third day, I was in bed and I wasn't able to move. I was at the point where the pain was so excruciating and my neck and shoulders were completely frozen. And even taking a step forward would send these shooting pains up the back of my spine and into my head. So I was forced to be in bed and was forced to be still. And this is what happened, is that I noticed how my prayer had been kind of racing thoughts. And I had been looking up ideas in my spiritual study in the Bible and the Science and Health book, and trying to sort of apply those ideas to the challenge that I was having. So remember those two lists? I was like, it was like I had put shoulder pain and neck pain on, which was on like the right-hand side, and I was trying to kind of problem solve it. Now, problem solving is a useful skill if you're a math student or doing some sort of project at a university, etc. But for prayer, problem solving wasn't effective in my case. And starting and saying, here's my problem, I'm going to try to apply a bunch of ideas and hope at the end I get to an experience of feeling relief, well, that didn't have any effect on me. What happened instead is that as my thought got really quiet as I was sitting in bed, and I started to let go of all of those racing thoughts, which took a couple of hours actually to really kind of shut that door on all the racing thoughts that were telling me I had to get going. I had all these things I had to do. Who was going to do them if not me? They wouldn't get accomplished very well if I didn't take care of them, et cetera, et cetera. So as I was noticing all of those racing thoughts, I slowly was able to just shut the door on them and turn completely and wholeheartedly over to listening for divine inspiration. And everyone hears divine inspiration differently, and it comes in a way that we may not expect, or a way that we can really hear. On this particular day, what I heard was this message that said, I am the shepherd. Now, I hadn't been thinking of shepherds and sheep, but I started to read in Psalms, the 23rd Psalm, and it talks all about these visions of sheep going by still waters and being comforted and cared for by God and by the shepherd. And I realized that this message about I am the shepherd was challenging my concept of me needing to get a lot of things done, of me being the mover and shaker of my life that was going to accomplish X number of things and be successful. And what it meant is that if God was my shepherd, that I had to be a sheep. And then I realized I didn't really like the concept of the sheep. I had a bias against the sheep. Because when I grew up, I'm actually sure I had a teacher at one point say, don't ever be a sheep. And what they meant by this was don't be a follower of other people. Think for yourself. And that's a really good message. But in this context, on this day, when I was sitting in bed struggling, what it meant to me was that I needed to actually revise my understanding of the sheep and understand the relationship I had to the shepherd. And as I did that, I started to think about these qualities of sheep. And if you have the chat box open, go ahead and chat in what you think the qualities for you. What are these? What are some good qualities of being a sheep with God as the shepherd? That's what I started to think about. And as I started to think about what it meant to be a good sheep, I thought of things like being obedient or really listening, about following, about humility, about that sense of innocence. Sheep will only drink if they're led to still waters. They will not drink if the water is troubled at all. And they trust that their shepherd will find them that still water so that they can be nourished. They also, someone mentioned, they listen willingly. The sheep listen willingly. The sheep don't say, excuse me, can I lead today? Would that be okay? Right, to the shepherd. They listen and they follow with that willingness, without really questioning it. And it doesn't mean we shouldn't question things in life or question concepts, but when we're looking to feel that oneness with God, it's about yielding our intellect and our thoughts and our mind, yielding to what God is doing, so that we can feel like we are the outcome of what God is doing, as opposed to the ones in charge doing with God as our helper. So for me, that was a really different understanding. And the sheep actually know the voice of the shepherd better than they can distinguish their shepherd's voice from many other voices. And that was what helped me realize I needed to understand this divine voice, this divine presence, and hear that voice more than I knew my own voice. And my own voice was what had been racing in my head for a couple of days with all the things I had to accomplish. But to really listen for what God's voice was saying felt like a whole shift in thinking for me. It meant that I had to let things unfold rather than feeling like I had to be in charge of them all the time. And what happened is, as I was sitting there for a number of hours, pondering these qualities of the sheep and really thinking about what it meant to be a sheep with God as my shepherd, what it meant to me was that rather than waking up in the morning and saying, "Good morning, God, here's all the things I have to do today. We've got a lot to accomplish," that my prayer really shifted into this kind of willingness, this sense of, "Good morning, God, what do you have in store today? How can I witness and see what's already done in divine creation, what's already been accomplished spiritually, and participate in that?" Which is a whole different understanding of my day, as opposed to, I have all these things to do and I need to make sure I do them well, and I'm going to pray about doing all them well. It was about seeing what had already been accomplished. And I could feel in that process the letting go and just letting all of this sense of false responsibility fall away. And my entire body literally just relaxed. And the tension and the anxiety and the stress and the pressure just kind of fell away as well. I stopped being worried about what would happen if I couldn't get better and go downstairs and accomplish all of my to-do list that I had to get done. And in the process, the pain also left from my shoulders. And not only was I relieved of the discomfort that moment, but it never came back. It stopped being an issue for me. Because what I remembered was that in order to shepherd everything I have going on in my family, in my work life, in my running routine, or my sports, endeavors, my competitions that I participate in, whatever it might be, any trips that I'm taking, that when I have to shepherd a project, that I can do that more effectively when I know how God is shepherding me. That's what enables me to bring stillness to what I'm doing. Sometimes for me, practicing stillness is really just about remembering to do it. That sometimes that can be the hardest part, is just remembering to be still. And if I remember to focus on that stillness and let that characterize my day, it has a very different effect than when I just kind of run into things. You can see on your screen, I think now, a little cartoon. And there's a little sheep on a cell phone, and there's the shepherd. And the sheep is looking at the cell phone, and the shepherd is saying, "You can't unfollow me. I'm your shepherd." And what I love about this, I'm assuming the sheep is on Facebook or something, but what I love about this is that there's this sense that no matter, even if we try to sort of feel in charge of things, that this relationship of the shepherd to each one of us keeps us in line, that's the role of the shepherd, to help turn us into the right direction. Sometimes when we're pondering a particular decision or a direction that we need to go in, it can feel like we're on the fence debating between two different things, what we should do, where should we go, is this better to do, is that better to do, should I date this person, should I date that person, what's the right answer here, how do I go about this? And what I have found in my experience is that when we're kind of standing still debating two options, it can often feel like we get stuck in the middle of them. And what I have found in my life is that when we start to take a step forward, that it's just like the sheep, that when they're moving, the shepherd just has to take the rod and gently move the sheep that are already kind of moving in a direction. They just gently kind of turn them in the direction they need to go. It's a lot harder to move a sheep that is kind of standing still to get them to go. But once they're in motion, it's just a gentle turning into the right direction. And then often taking a step forward, we feel that divine presence moving us in the way that we need to go. And if it's not the right direction, we'll be turned around into the right direction. Now, this experience to me of having this relief from this chronic pain in my neck and shoulders was really, for me, an experience of what Mary Baker Eddy says in this passage you see on the screen. She said, "To the burdened and weary, Jesus saith, Come unto me. There remaineth a rest for the righteous, a rest in Christ, a peace in love. The thought of it stills complaint. The heaving surf of life's troubled sea foams itself away, and underneath is a deep settled calm." That sense of calm is already there. We're not looking to create it. We don't have to escape from our environment and go elsewhere, be done with our projects or done with our responsibilities to finally feel that sense of peace. We're looking to find it in the middle of our busiest day. And I know for me, when I was in university, when I was in college, I had taken on one particular semester a workload that was just overwhelming and did not seem humanly possible. In addition to all of my work and course load that where I had taken extra classes on, I had a number of extracurricular activities where I was in leadership roles and was responsible for numerous projects that were all crucial in that particular semester. And this was the semester where I decided to dedicate myself to 15 minutes a day, where I would go to this little room that was on my campus and I could shut the door, literally, and it was completely quiet. There was no street noise, there was no outside noise. The heavy door shut out all of the noise outside. And I would just spend that 15 minutes shutting everything out of my thought that I had to do and just focusing on listening prayer. And even though I disciplined myself to only 15 minutes, that's all I thought I could give. When I got up 15 minutes later to leave the room, it was as if I was taking this incredible, profound, substantial sense of stillness with me back into my life. And it just calmed me in an incredible way that allowed me to go into whatever I had to do, however many things, however late I was going to be up that night, that I was able to do it without feeling that sense of pressure or anxiety. It was this deep, settled calm that as we connect with that, and sometimes, again, it's just remembering to be still in the middle of our day that refocuses us. And then we can go forward and feel that sense of stillness. Let's look briefly at a sense of relationships to others. When there's different conflicts or we bump up against things, how can we maintain that stillness first? And the idea that really helps me here is the sense of the idea that Paul was teaching to many of the people he taught, the Philippians, the Corinthians, in many different ways. He said, "You have the mind of Christ. Let the same mind be in you that was in Christ Jesus. Let that mind be there." Now, this Christ mind, this idea of the Christ mind is the spirit that, and it's like it's a divine influence that's irresistible. It's the most interesting thing we have going on in our thought. And sometimes we get so busy or feeling so pulled by the demands of our schedule that we forget to let that mind of Christ lead us in the right direction. Now, think for yourselves for a moment, what characterizes the mind of Christ for you? There's a story in the Bible about Jesus when he comes to Jericho. And there's a big crowd surrounding him, as there always is, and people are shouting and yelling. And by the side of the road is a man who's blind named Bartimaeus. And as Jesus arrives and Bartimaeus hears that Jesus is there, he starts to shout for Jesus to come and heal his blindness. As he starts to cry out, the disciples who are with Jesus start to tell Bartimaeus to be quiet, not bother Jesus. But the more they say that, the louder he yells and screams that he wants Jesus to come and help him. And then in the Bible, it says, Jesus stood still. Now, I asked myself, why? Why didn't Jesus rush up to Bartimaeus and heal him like that? Because everybody would have quieted down. It would have calmed the storm of all the people around. But Jesus stood still first, and then he went and healed Bartimaeus. And I think this is what the mind of Christ does, is it says whatever we have to do on any given day, that rather than react immediately to our circumstances or to someone that's demanding something of us, that there's a power in the pause to let that mind of Christ intervene in a way that changes the conversation. Now, I have a good friend who experienced this one day. She woke up and she's covered from her shoulders all the way to her hands and all her legs and her feet in this rash that was very irritating and itchy. And she was thinking about how she wanted to react to this and was really struggling with feeling okay about it. And she was someone who grew up praying about all kinds of conditions. So she wanted to sort of find that stillness in her thought that would change her experience in her body. But she was having a difficult time calming the anxiety she felt. And as she called her sister to ask for help, her sister told her, "Oh, I'll pray with you, but again, just lose all of your anxiety." She thought that was a good idea, but she found it really challenging. She spent some time praying and thinking that day, but she couldn't get her mind off of wondering, what happened? Where did this come from? Is it going to stay forever? Am I going to scratch it and it's going to leave marks? Is it going to be problematic? Blah, blah, blah. Near the end of the day, she still hadn't found relief. And her husband finally suggested that they go out for a walk in town. It's a full moon night, and they go to the area of town where there's a beautiful river, and they stand on the bridge overlooking the river. And the full moon is perfectly reflected in the stillness of the river's surface below. And she stands there for a while and watches the reflection of the moon on the water. And then a breeze comes up and ruffles the surface of the water. And this moon on the water shatters into a million fragments. And as she keeps watching, she looks up at the moon in the sky, and of course it's still whole and complete. And as she keeps watching the scattered, fragmented moon, the breeze dies down and the moon comes back together on the surface of the water. And immediately she thinks of a haiku poem that she knew from years before, that she hadn't thought of in ages. And it goes like this: broken and broken again on the wave, how easily mends the moon. She was so delighted with this idea of the moon mending itself on the water, that the reflected image of the whole perfect moon was seen in the stillness. She was so captured by this idea that she walked home that night, and as she fell asleep, she was still pondering what she had seen, and this idea of how it's in the stillness where we reflect the wholeness. She fell asleep and woke up the next morning. There was no evidence of the rash, and it never came back. And she thought about this idea that Mary Baker Eddy writes, where she says, absorbed in material selfhood, we discern and reflect but faintly the substance of life or mind. That our reflection of that wholeness and perfection is more easily seen when we let go of a material concept of ourselves, a sort of physical bodily concept of who we are. That when we're absorbed in that, we're a faint reflection of the original wholeness, the original idea of God that we each are the natural outcome of. And what this experience says to me is that when we're in relationship to others, whether it's an irritation with a person or an irritation with the body, that we're looking to find that sense of the Christ idea that allows us to focus on the Christ mind as opposed to our own ability to think things. Sometimes in Christian Science healing, we get caught up thinking that it's our own mind and what we're thinking that creates healing, when in reality, it's the subduing and the quieting of our own mind to align consciousness perfectly with God's mind that allows us to see the true reality of what's going on, the true spiritual what already is, to see what God has already done. And that's what my friend experienced in this particular story. And before we go to part 3, I'll just share another brief experience. I have 2 younger sisters. And at one point when I was a new mom, I had a little baby, and my younger sister, who still has no children, she has a PhD. So that's been her baby for quite some time. And so she used to love, when I was a new mom, to give me parenting advice. She would come over and we'd be talking, and then she'd see me do something with my son, and she'd immediately launch into a wonderful example of how I could do it differently. But as I said, she had no kids, right? So this became a source of irritation for me. And we started to have a bit of conflict regarding how this, what was happening here. We got into kind of a pattern of reaction to each other. And after months of this, I became, I guess I would say, curious about a different way of relating to my sister, that I wanted to do a relationship with her that wasn't based on this reaction to each other. And I thought about that Christ idea, the idea of the Christ mind, that the mind of Christ doesn't live in reaction to other people because it gets its thoughts directly from God. And so rather than drawing conclusions from what we see, the way we see other people behaving, we draw conclusions based on what the Christ idea tells us. And I wanted to experience the Christ idea in me connecting with the Christ idea in my sister. And that's my goal. So when she came over the next time, I was really focused on this, and I didn't know how I would accomplish it exactly, but I thought about that pause we talked about and so the next time she started to give me parenting advice, I just felt this mental quiet, this mental pause of sort of standing still mentally. And immediately an idea occurred to me, and I shared it with her, and we just started laughing, and it broke all this tension. And I have no idea what idea came to me, but to me, that is the way that Christ operates, that it intervenes in the moment, in that pause, right before we were about to react, and gives us something new to think about. All right, so in our final few minutes here, I just want to talk a little bit about how we can think about stillness in light of world events. And there's a story that I learned when I was in peace building years ago that helps me think about this. There was a contest for children that was held, and they asked children to share what they thought peace meant to them. And they were supposed to draw it. So all these drawings were submitted, and the winning drawing was a picture of a rushing, roaring, powerful waterfall that was tumbling over and spilling into the pool below with all this turbulence being stirred up. And if you've been to one of these waterfalls, it's not a quiet place, right? It's loud. You have to kind of shout to be heard over the tumbling water. It's all, very churned up, etc. And right behind the waterfall on a little ledge, the child had drawn a yellow canary, and the canary was pictured as singing. Now, think for a moment about what that says to you personally. What does that speak to you? Why did they choose that image to represent peace? For me, I love many different insights from this picture, but it represents to me the sense that the canary was singing regardless of the fact of whether or not the little bird could be heard. The canary was singing without worrying about if anybody was listening to the sound or the song. The canary wasn't disturbed by the noise and the turbulence and the churning next door, but was just focused on the song. And the canary was singing because it was designed to sing. It was operating in the way it was designed to operate. It was giving what it had to give. Similarly to the cellist we talked about at the beginning, who was the principal cellist of the Sarajevo Opera Orchestra. He was designed to play music. That was his talent. The canary bird is designed to offer that song, regardless of how loud the noise gets nearby. I think this brings us back again to, we're not looking to change our environment to find that sense of peace. Now, when we're looking at world events, this doesn't mean that we just accept everything out there in the world and say, well, I guess there's nothing we can do about it. We'll just accept everything and have to go along with it. But it doesn't mean we don't work for change. But the way that we work for change is first by finding that sense of peace so that we don't lose our song, our unique song. So that we don't jump into the pool where the water is spilling down and let it just kind of wash over us and feel continuously overwhelmed by whatever particular events in the world seem to be occurring. Or feel like we're staring at the waterfall, yelling at it to change or to be different, or to, wishing it would be different or go away so that we could find a sense of peace. Right? The canary is not talking to the waterfall to get it to change. The canary is just singing. And that to me is what the Christian Science Monitor does. To me, it's like that canary, that it's each one of us is looking to find the way that we can contribute to the conversation in a way that offers a little bit of that sense of stillness. And the Christian Science Monitor to me is like that canary voice that just keeps singing regardless of how turbulent things get out there in the world. It doesn't ignore the waterfall. The canary wasn't off away from the waterfall. It was right next to it. It was in the midst of what was happening, but it was offering a different sound to listen to. And that to me is what the Christian Science Monitor does, is it gives a different perspective that's intended to bring blessing and healing to the world. And this idea from Mary Baker Eddy to me just really sums up the way that stillness characterizes our work in the world. That the best spiritual type of Christly method for uplifting human thought and imparting divine truth is stationary power, stillness, and strength. And when this spiritual ideal is made our own, it becomes the model for human action. That the model for action in the world on any particular event comes from the stillness, that's the strength that we have and that we can offer. Now I'll just share one last story, and it gives you an opportunity to look here on your screen and find the Q&A box if you have any questions or any comments you'd like to add in, and we'll just jump to that in a second for a couple of minutes here. But I'll just share one other story that happened to me when I was 20. And it relates to really focusing on the stillness for the world. I met a woman who had lived in Eastern Germany during the time where the Berlin Wall was dividing East and West Germany. And I was, as I said, 20 years old, and this woman was talking about how she prayed every single day for 10 years for the wall to come down. And at the time, I was so incredulous. I couldn't imagine. This was half of my lifetime. How could you pray every single day without seeing results in the world for this kind of an issue that seemed so intractable? So I asked her the question, and she said something I'll never forget. She said, "Laurie, the wall came down in a moment, but it was not the work of a moment. That it was the work of the change and the shift in consciousness over so many days and moments that allowed the result of the wall to come down." And then she said, "How do you think you change consciousness?" To her, every effort in prayer, which to her meant finding that and connecting and tuning into that sense of stillness till she felt that sense of peace about the world. That every effort she made was chipping away at the mental blocks that were keeping that wall up. That as she changed and adjusted what was going on in her thoughts, that it was allowing other people to also find and adjust their thinking to the point where there was this effect on the larger consciousness that resulted in the wall coming down. But any development in the world, the iPhone, self-driving cars, et cetera, starts with an idea, with the opening of thought to a new idea. It always starts with idea. And that is what prayer affects, is consciousness and ideas. That as we work in ourselves to remain open, to not get cynical, to have a sense of hopefulness about our communities, no matter what kind of issues we might be dealing with, whether it's drug use that seems rampant and seems to be overwhelming, whether it's just a sense of feeling overwhelmed on a regular basis by all that we have going on, whether it's whatever issues we might be facing in our communities, that every effort we make to find and connect with that inner sense of calm for ourselves about it has an effect in the world to change the thought that is allowing the solution to be found. And I'll just end with one idea from Mary Baker Eddy. And you'll see it in a moment on your screen here. She writes, Mind revolves on a spiritual axis, and its power is displayed and its presence felt in eternal stillness and immovable love. I hope that for the rest of your day, wherever you are, that you take this sense of stillness with you, that you remember that we talked about how it's already found within you, that it's an eternal stillness that doesn't just come and go with circumstances, and that sometimes the best way to practice it is just remembering to be curious and to ask how we can let that stillness lead us and characterize our day. That sometimes it's helpful to stop and take a moment and pause to let that mind of Christ characterize every one of our movements. But that just letting that idea take us forward and connecting and tuning ourselves in continuously throughout the day, tuning in to being still, can change the way we experience and the way we accomplish all that we have to do. May you feel that today and throughout the Christmas season and throughout all the things you have to do the rest of this month. Thank you for joining us today. I will go off the screen now, but keep the web lecture open for about 5 or 10 minutes. If you have comments or questions, you can chat in the chat box or the question and answer box, and I'll be happy to respond via text to any of your further questions or comments that you have. Thank you so much for joining us to think about the healing power of being still. Bye-bye.